Deep inside a cave in South Africa, there is a chamber you can only reach by crawling through passages so tight they crush against your ribs, then down a vertical crack in the rock just 8 inches wide in places, dropping 40 feet into the dark. No natural light has ever reached the bottom of it. No animal could have wandered in by accident. It is one of the most inaccessible places a human body has ever been found. And yet, at the bottom, in total darkness, lie the bones of at least 15 ancient humans. Adults, children, infants. Placed there, deliberately by someone who carried them one by one through that nightmare of stone, in the pitch black, just to lay them to rest. The question is who? And the answer may rewrite the story of what it means to be human. Let's start with what we always assumed. We like to think that caring for the dead is the thing that separates us from the animals. That burying your loved ones, mourning them, believing they go somewhere, is a uniquely human act. The most advanced, most meaningful thing our big brains ever learned to do. A lion doesn't bury another lion. A deer walks away from its dead. Only humans, we tell ourselves, stop and grieve and dig a grave. But the bodies at the bottom of that South African cave are quietly destroying that idea. Because the creature that carried them down there did not have a big, complex brain. It was a species called Homo naledi. They stood a little over 4 feet tall, and their brains were about 1/3 the size of yours. By every assumption we had, they should not have been capable of what they appear to have done. And yet the evidence suggests they may have been deliberately burying their dead more than 100,000 years before the first modern humans or Neanderthals ever did. Let's talk about why that's so hard to explain away. When archaeologists find ancient bones in a cave, there are usually simple explanations. The person fell in, a flood washed them there, a predator dragged them in. Scientists look for those first because they're the boring, likely answers. But in this chamber, deep in the Rising Star cave system, none of them work. There's no evidence of a predator. No flood could have carried bodies through that twisting vertical passage. The cave shows no sign that anyone ever lived in it, so they didn't simply die where they slept. And the bodies appear to have been placed in deliberate pits, some curled into a fetal position, the way you might gently lay someone down to sleep. To get there at all, the living would have had to make that terrifying journey into the earth in complete darkness, carrying their dead, almost certainly using fire to light the way. Think about what that means. This was not convenient, it was not easy, it was dangerous and exhausting and frightening. And they did it anyway. Something compelled a small-brained ancient human to pick up the body of someone who had died and carry it down into the most hidden place they knew and leave it there with care. That is not the behavior of an animal reacting to a corpse. That looks like something else. That looks like grief. And that brings us to the real heart of this story. Because the deepest question isn't how ancient humans dealt with the dead, it's when they started to care. For most of life's history, death meant nothing. An animal dies, and the world moves on. Even today, most animals show little reaction to a dead member of their own kind. But not all of them. Elephants will stop at the bones of a dead relative and touch them gently with their trunks, sometimes returning for years. Chimpanzees have been seen sitting with their dead, grooming a body long after it's gone cold. Even crows gather around their dead in what researchers call a funeral. So the seeds of grief, the sense that a death matters, may be far older and more widespread than we ever thought. It isn't unique to us. What humans did was take that feeling and build something on top of it. We didn't just feel the loss. We started to act on it, to respond to death with ritual, with intention, with meaning. And the burials at Rising Star may be one of the oldest signs of that anywhere on Earth. But Homo naledi is not the only ancient human who dealt with the dead. As we move closer to our own time, the evidence gets richer and stranger. Take the Neanderthals. For a long time, we pictured them as brutish and simple, but that picture keeps falling apart. At sites across Europe and the Middle East, archaeologists have found strong evidence that Neanderthals deliberately buried their dead. At La Chapelle-aux-Saints in France, a Neanderthal appears to have been laid carefully in a pit. At Shanidar Cave in Iraq, several Neanderthals were found together, and for decades researchers debated whether one had been buried with flowers, based on ancient pollen found around the body. Whether or not it was flowers, the pattern is clear. These were not bodies left to rot where they fell. Someone cared enough to place them, to gather them, to return to them. And by the time we reach early modern humans, the dead are being treated with unmistakable ceremony. At a cave in Israel, a mother and child were laid to rest together around 90,000 years ago. Across the ancient world, we begin to find the dead buried with objects, tools, ochre, a red pigment sprinkled over the body, beads, food. And that detail, the objects, is one of the most haunting things in all of prehistory. Because you do not give gifts to a corpse, corpse unless, on some level, you believe the dead person still needs them. The moment ancient humans started burying their dead with tools and food and red pigment, they were telling us something across tens of thousands of years. They believed, or hoped, or feared that death was not the end, that the person was going somewhere, and that they might need something when they got there. This may be the very beginning of religion, the first time a human looked at death and refused to accept that it was simply nothing. But here's where I have to be honest with you, because the science here is genuinely uncertain, and that's part of what makes it so fascinating. Not everyone agrees on what these sites mean. The Homo naledi burials in particular are fiercely debated. Some researchers argue the bodies could have ended up there some other way, or that burial is too strong a word for simply placing bodies in a cave. Proving intention, proving belief, proving grief from bones hundreds of thousands of years old is one of the hardest things in all of science. We can find the body, we can find the pit, we cannot dig up the feeling that put it there. And there are other theories that have nothing to do with the afterlife at all. One recent idea suggests that as Homo sapiens and Neanderthals started living in the same regions, they may have used their buried dead almost like fence posts, a way of marking, "This land belongs to my people." A grave as a territorial claim. Proof that your ancestors were here in the ground first. Death in that version wasn't about the next world. It was about owning this one. We may never know for certain which is true. It was probably, like most things in human history, a tangled mix of all of them. Grief and belief and fear and territory and love all wrapped together in the simple, staggering act of not walking away from the dead. So how did ancient humans deal with the dead? They did the one thing no creature had ever really done before. They refused to let death be the end of the story. A small-brained species crawled into the deepest dark they knew to lay their children to rest. Neanderthals gathered their fallen and placed them in the earth. Early humans covered their dead in red pigment and surrounded them with everything they might need for a journey to somewhere else. We tend to think of our ancestors as primitive, focused only on food, on danger, on survival. But the graves tell a different story. They tell us that almost as far back as we can see, humans were already doing the most human thing of all. They were loving people so much that they could not bear to simply let them go. We didn't become human when we picked up the first tool, or lit the first fire, or spoke the first word. We may have become human the first time one of us stood over the body of someone they loved and decided that they mattered too much to leave behind. And every grave, every funeral, every goodbye you have ever said is part of that same unbroken story. One that began in the dark hundreds of thousands of years ago, with someone carrying someone else gently into the earth, and refusing for the first time to say that death was simply nothing at all.